In the frozen Yukon, history doesn't whisper, it roars. And this season, it roared louder than anyone thought possible. Tony Beets, the self-crowned king of the Klondike, has just pulled off a strike so massive it borders on myth. $85 million in gold, ripped from the dirt in only weeks. Truck after truck rolled in. Sluice boxes didn't just run. They shimmered like rivers of molten sunlight. Parker Schnabel's record haul? Pocket change in comparison. Even Discovery's cameras struggled to keep up as Tony's mine churned out gold at a pace nobody believed was possible. But this wasn't just another payday. Something about this find felt different. Rumors swirled of secret ground, hidden veins, and a gamble only Tony would dare take. Whatever it was, one thing was clear. The Yukon had just revealed a second golden age. And it all began on a day that should have been routine. Engines roared, sunlight burned across the ridges, and the Beets crew chewed through pay dirt like always. Then, the ground moved. The 50-ton dozer shuddered, the earth groaned, and Kevin Beets' voice cracked across the radio. "Dad, you'd better get down here. The hill isn't right." When Tony arrived, boots crunching on gravel, he saw the dozer frozen mid-track, its treads sunk deep. The ground wasn't permafrost anymore. It was hollow. Sunlight pierced the gap, and something inside gleamed. Not dust, not flakes. Gold. But not like they'd ever seen. Too clean, too deliberate. For the first time in years, Tony's voice dropped to a whisper. "This ain't pay dirt, boys. This is something else entirely." Hours later, the shock doubled. The dredge, the million-dollar heart of Tony's empire, jammed to a stop. Mechanics tore it open, expecting frozen gravel. Instead, golden slabs tumbled out, sheets of metal so dense they bent steel teeth. Floodlights lit the pit wall, and the crew stood blinded. Jagged gold veins crisscrossed the earth like frozen lightning. Monica stared, her voice shaking. "It looks like someone put this here." Veterans who'd clawed Yukon dirt for decades said nothing. The machines weren't digging anymore. They were prying open a vault. And then, the clean-out. The first load hit the weigh station, but the digital scales crashed, blinking error codes. Too heavy to register. In a scramble, they dragged out century-old beam balances from Dawson's museum just to measure the gold. One run, just one, clocked $12.3 million. That single load equaled Parker's best month, in one night. Word spread instantly through Dawson's saloons, rippling like wildfire across the Klondike. By morning, the story had traveled farther than the creeks, into offices, onto screens, into the ears of rivals who lived and died by ounces. And in a cramped cabin, lit by diesel glare, the news landed hardest. Parker Schnabel sat hunched over charts spread like war plans, numbers that once crowned him king, now mocking him. His best cleanups, once proof that youth could outwork the old guard, looked pathetic stacked against Tony Beets' first 3 weeks. Parker slammed his fists, a coffee mug shattering across the floor. Every red-marked claim on his map suddenly felt like sand slipping away. Investors who once worshipped him had gone quiet, and with each new whisper, one truth echoed louder. Maybe the crown had passed back to the Viking. Rick Ness fared no better. His bank account bled out faster than diesel through a cracked hose. Bills towered higher than his pay dirt piles. Suppliers wanted cash up front, and his backers were already sniffing toward Paradise Hill. Late-night calls cut like knives. "Why aren't we with Beets?" Rick had no answer. Deep down, he knew the truth. Tony had locked down the richest leases years ago. What looked like business savvy now felt like prophecy. Then the scientists weighed in, and panic turned to awe. Geologists drilled Tony's new cut and returned white as ghosts. Beneath the permafrost lay an unbroken seam of nearly pure gold. Not flakes, not ore. Sheets, so refined it looked smelted, as if someone had already processed it. Tony's land agent muttered about old maps and whispered legends. The lost Dutchman's seams, rumored caches never proven in the Klondike. Suddenly, the drunken ramblings in century-old journals looked less like fantasy and more like breadcrumbs. As excavators clawed deeper, the mystery only thickened. Kevin's crew unearthed ancient timbers, cut clean, placed with purpose, buried far below where any prospector from the 1890s could have worked. Some swore the wood still smelled of pitch, sealed for centuries. Monica's helmet light flickered over the walls veined with gold, and she whispered, "This wasn't nature's work. Somebody built this." That one line was enough. Dawson erupted in rumors, ancient syndicates, lost expeditions, maybe even guardians hiding fortunes in the frozen earth. Tony didn't care for stories, he cared for gold. He threw his entire operation into overdrive. 3 shifts, helicopters ferrying fuel, floodlights turning night into day. Monica commanded her pit like a general, hauling weekly tallies that crushed rival crews' entire seasons. Kevin, sleepless and grease-stained, treated the dredge like an engine of war. Even veterans admitted they'd never seen anything like it. By mid-season, the weigh-ins bordered on myth. 5 million one week, 12 the next, 15 after that. The weigh station blinked out, overloaded. Discovery's producers, men who'd seen every kind of mining drama, whispered to each other, "This is different." Crew morale went feverish. They weren't miners anymore. They were stampeders reborn, except this time they weren't clawing flakes from rivers. They were hauling fortunes by the ton. And at the center of it all, arms crossed, beard glinting in the floodlights, Tony Beets finally said it out loud. "This ain't no rush. This is an empire." The words didn't stay on the hill. They traveled. What began as whispers among the crew rippled outward, across radio chatter, through Discovery's lenses, into the veins of Dawson itself. Hotels that once limped through the season half empty now turned away guests by the dozen. Lobby floors packed with sleeping bags as latecomers begged for rooms. Bars overflowed, their doors swinging like saloon scenes from the old frontier. And every stranger nursed the same fever, the chance to chase the shadows of Tony Beets' impossible strike. Flights into Whitehorse and Dawson tripled within weeks, the airstrips swarming with opportunists, prospectors clutching battered pans, entrepreneurs hawking mining gear, tourists hungry to breathe the dust of legend. Locals whispered a new name for the epicenter of it all: New El Dorado. Paradise Hill had become less a mine and more a pilgrimage site. The Yukon government couldn't ignore the ripples. Revenues soared from the sudden influx of money, while officials scrambled to manage the chaos, issuing emergency permits, bolstering infrastructure, even deploying extra patrols to handle the crowds. International press descended in a storm, headlines screaming, "Second Klondike Rush begins," led by Tony Beets. The world had its new gold rush, and at its core was a grizzled Dutch-Canadian who had somehow rewritten the story of the Yukon in his own image. Discovery's cameras, normally content to follow dirt and drama, struggled to capture the scale. Drone shots revealed excavations that glittered like rivers of fire beneath the floodlights, raw veins of yellow slicing through black earth. The Yukon's economy, once a patchwork of tourism, mining, and wilderness lore, now orbited wholly around one claim and one man. Tony Beets was no longer just a miner. He was a kingmaker, dictating the flow of wealth and dreams. But with fortune came fury. Parker Schnabel's loyal fans accused Tony of playing a game no one else was allowed to join. Online threads buzzed with allegations that Beets had struck deals with Canadian geologists behind closed doors, securing access to satellite surveys hidden from the public. He cherry-picked, the accusations read. He knew where to drill before anyone else had a chance. Old rumors resurfaced like ghosts, whispers that Tony had bribed Dawson officials decades earlier, ensuring that hidden parcels of ground were quietly shuffled into his name. Conspiracy theorists went even further. They claimed Paradise Hill had been salted generations ago by secret syndicates, a vault of pre-refined wealth buried for reasons long forgotten, and Beets had merely stumbled onto its retrieval. The tension boiled in Dawson's bars. Crews that once swapped stories over whiskey now erupted into fistfights, broken bottles flashing as voices screamed accusations of theft, corruption, or divine luck. Tony's name was on every tongue, half in reverence, half in venom. But while the town raged, the man himself stayed unshaken. Reporters cornered him, critics circled, and still he gestured to the towers of gold bricks stacked behind him like fortifications. His words were blunt, delivered with that heavy Dutch accent that cut through doubt like a blade. Talk all you want. The numbers don't lie, and the numbers only grew. One clean-out shattered belief itself, surpassing $25 million in a single week. The scales struggled under the weight, forcing Tony to buy industrial safes and even convert entire shipping containers into makeshift vaults. Cameramen captured footage that looked more like a treasure hoard than a mine, stacks of sunlit bricks rising like miniature pyramids, each bar a fortune unto itself. The networks couldn't contain themselves. Every outlet declared it the richest haul in the history of reality television. Rival miners, hardened men who had spent their lives clawing through mud for flakes, found themselves in tears. Some wept openly, not out of envy, but because they knew they were watching history. This was the moment future generations would point to as the richest strike ever caught on film. And they had lived to see it. Even the global markets felt the tremor. Analysts noted an anomaly on the charts. Yukon's sudden influx of supply was enough to nudge gold pricing for the first time in decades. Traders in New York, London, and Shanghai spoke the same name with reluctant awe. Tony Beets. The man had done what no central bank could do. He had single-handedly shaken the world's gold balance. And still, even surrounded by mountains of treasure, Tony's eyes gleamed with something harder than satisfaction. Surveying the gleam of his empire, he muttered words that left his crew silent, the weight of their truth undeniable. And we're still just scratching the bloody surface. Those words proved prophetic. When mid-season totals were tallied with the precision of accountants counting empires, the figure stunned even the most seasoned miners. An unthinkable $85 million in confirmed gold already recovered. It wasn't just a new record. It was a record so obliterated that comparisons seemed absurd. Parker Schnabel's previous high-water mark, $14 million in a grueling season, now looked like a child's allowance against Tony Beets' fortune. And the insult to Parker was sharper because Tony had achieved it in mere weeks. Discovery's producers scrambled in real time, abandoning old narratives mid-season to reframe the show entirely. Crews were repositioned, cameras pointed squarely at Tony's towering stacks of gleaming bricks, and the man once painted as a gruff, supporting character now stood alone as the unquestionable star. Rivals collapsed beneath the weight of his success. Rick Ness faced looming bankruptcy, investors abandoning his shaky operation, while Parker's empire, once the future of the Yukon, began hemorrhaging confidence from bankers and backers alike. Across the globe, headlines screamed in unified awe. King of Klondike reigns again, Tony Beets' $85 million strike. Yet even as the numbers reverberated across financial pages and news broadcasts, the questions began to multiply. Geologists who flocked to the site stood baffled before the purity and continuity of the ore. In theory, Yukon geology could never yield deposits of this kind. Not in volume, not in concentration, not with such uninterrupted consistency. Some insisted they were witnessing an anomaly, a once-in-history phenomenon that textbooks would struggle to explain. Others refused to accept natural explanation at all. Conspiracy theorists flooded the airwaves and forums, weaving elaborate tales that Tony's fortune was never truly born of the earth. Whispers stretched across centuries, linking his strike to legends of the Knights Templar, treasure supposedly carried across the Atlantic and hidden in the New World. Grainy photos of crosses carved into rock outcrops circulated online, proof that Paradise Hill was less a mine than a vault of ancient wealth deliberately buried and forgotten. Alternate theories surfaced, wilder yet strangely plausible. Some pointed to World War II expeditions, noting rumors that European gold reserves may have been shipped overseas to prevent seizure by Axis forces, only to be lost in Canada's frozen wilderness. Perhaps Paradise Hill was never a gold field at all, but a clandestine repository, stumbled upon at last by a stubborn Dutchman with a knack for turning dirt into legacy. Forums erupted with argument, every photo and drone shot dissected as if scripture, every clue hotly debated. Was Tony Beets unearthing natural ore or cracking open mankind's hidden history? To many, the answer mattered less than the spectacle itself. What mattered was that Paradise Hill, once just another claim on a Yukon hillside, had been transformed overnight into legend. Whether myth or geology, it had become a symbol, an intersection of fortune, faith, and fire. And at the heart of it all stood Tony Beets. Weather-beaten, scarred by decades of labor in the Yukon cold, he was no stranger to hardship. Yet here he was, standing taller than ever before, holding in his calloused hands proof that persistence could outlast youth, rivals, and even time itself. Where others gambled and failed, Tony had endured. His children now looked not at piles of gold, but at the birthright of empire. The Beets dynasty etched forever into the lore of the Klondike. Paradise Hill was no longer just a stretch of ground. It was a pilgrimage site. Fortune seekers came to breathe the dust, historians arrived to chase half-remembered legends, and dreamers traveled from across oceans to stand where history had been rewritten by a man in overalls with fire in his eyes. As the Yukon's rivals faded to whispers, Parker humbled, Rick erased, lesser crews scattered, the Beets family ascended to something larger than wealth. They became Yukon's eternal monarchs, the name Beets forever synonymous with gold itself. Tourists called Tony the King of Klondike, but among miners, the title carried heavier weight. A recognition that in this unforgiving land, where fortunes usually collapsed as quickly as they rose, one man had bent the earth to his will and carved his name into eternity. Looking out over mountains of treasure, Tony said little, but he didn't need to. The gold spoke for him, and in that silence, one truth echoed clear as the Yukon wind. This wasn't just about gold. This was history forged in the very bones of the earth, and its name was Tony Beets.